Welcome. I'm your host, Malcolm Gallagher. From our BizVision studios in the UK, you're watching the Leadership Matters show on the BVTV network. I'm looking forward to meeting my guest today, as I believe we have similar passions and similar thinking about leadership in these altered times. You see, my life's mantra has always been no problems, only opportunities. And that's helped me weather many challenges in many ways, but especially in today's, as I call it, altered times. My guest today has similar thinking about this time being an unprecedented opportunity for leaders to become more agile, empower their teams, enact change, and adapt. He's the 2020 World's Top 100 Coaching Leader, the host of Empower Me, and the leader of the Human Innovation Garage. So let's zoom to Boston in the USA and say hello to Stephan Thieringer. Well, hello, welcome, Stephan.
Malcolm, hello from Boston, from the East Coast. Grateful to be here. And hello, everybody who's with us today as well online.
Yeah. Are you still having tea parties over there, by the way?
Oh, plenty. I had my first tea party this morning just to get ready for you and also to get into the British culture this morning.
Oh, yes, that's for certain. Well, Stephan, apart from being fascinated in what you do and who you do it for, I was also intrigued by the name of your business, the Human Innovation Garage. So briefly tell us about yourself and why that name for your business.
So thank you again, Malcolm. So very quickly, let me start with your first question, Human Innovation Garage. Humans, that's what we all are. And I think humans, also the world needs more humility, I think, particularly this day and age. The innovation is, I always believe in the brilliance and the inherent brilliant pieces of human beings. And innovation is not something brand new. It is really taking things that we find all around us and reassembling, reorganizing, bringing them back together in a new light, and you talked about that, not just challenging, but opportune times we have right now, and bringing that together in brilliant, new, inherent ways. And then the garage, what we believe is a tool set, some structure which helps you to not just to teach you how to fish, but also you learn how to fish, giving you tools, resources that allow you to stay on track, if that's in the areas of accountability or simply goal vision and various other pieces. I'm sure as we go into the conversation, we can get a little deeper into it. Myself, I'm German. I told you in our first conversation, still hold living on the East Coast, closest way home. Big fan of British culture and British Airways. And I do fly Virgin as well. So we don't want to, take that all away. I have some dear friends living in the United Kingdom as well. But I am German. I'm from Stuttgart originally. And the city I guess we're best known for is the two cars we make, which is Porsche and Mercedes. But I've been in the US for on and off almost 30 years now. I was thinking about it this morning. It's quite unbelievable. But always kept the contact, certainly with the global and the rest of the world. And one of my favorite countries is India. And obviously the British culture there is, particularly in cities like Kolkata and others, still very predominant. So always the connection to your side of the world.
Yes. Some other time we've got to chat about a German in the USA, because I think that's going to be a fascinating conversation. In my opening piece, I said you hold the accolade of 2020 World's Top 100 Coaching Leader. That's impressive. Tell us what it is and what it means for clients.
You know what it means for clients? I think accolades, and I think this is a general leadership conversation, accolades don't mean anything for clients. I think it's a way to identify, and when you live in the context of, am I looking for somebody who can serve and support me in leadership thinking, as a sounding board, as an advisor, as a resonance in the business that I'm in. I think it's important to have somewhat of a validation, which is external. But in the end, it's about the experience two people have with each other and how the individual experiences you, or the transaction or the support they're receiving. What it means simply is that the World Human Resource Conference, as well as the World Coaching Congress, has awarded 101 people in the world to get that particular designation in 2020. That was given in February. And I'm very grateful for it. I'm very happy about it, while at the same time very clear that the work which is done with the individuals or teams or companies that ultimately determines if that is validated or not. So it's easy to have an accolade, but in the end, it's about the experience you have, the experience I have with something, if it actually is holding true for you individually. I think that's an important piece to remember in any accolade. An accolade is patient on paper, but the reality is what happens right here.
Well said. Now, let's get down to leadership in today's altered world. I totally agree with your thoughts on agility and adaptiveness, but what stops leaders from doing it, from being agile and adaptive?
I think there's a lot of, the first piece I would bring up in the first emotion, because I think as leaders, regardless at what levels, we have to have a realization that emotions play a big part in the way we organize our own world, our own culture house, as I like to call it, and then how do we externally project it? And I think the biggest part is anxiety and fear. That's, I think, the number one reason. And the uncertainty, I think we're experiencing in the global markets right now, and not just in the markets in the context of financial markets, but I think in your own ecosystem as an organization. Doesn't matter how small you are, how big you are, there's uncertainty on the leadership side. And I think the part also that with good leadership comes with that is that we have responsibility and accountability to the people who work with us and for us. And if a leader really looks in the context, and I'm happy to elaborate on that more, of servant leadership, being of service to the people and empowering the people and taking care of the people that are involved in my business, in the business in general. And that may be internal as well as external, right? Many years ago, I was in the hospitality business when I first came to the United States back in the early 90s. And working for companies like Ritz-Carlton and managing hotels like the Waldorf Astoria in New York, people has always been kind of my beacon. And that's what I've always enjoyed. But it's about experiences, right? Maya Angelou said it so nicely. People may not remember what you look like, but they will always remember how you made them feel. And I think that's where leadership really, in this day and age today, we talked about what's the opportunity in 2021, or how do I prepare myself for that impact I'm looking to make as an individual or organization? That's where it starts. How do I leave people? How do I meet people? How do I impress people? And again, not impressing by accolades, but what's the values I can communicate? And I think that's where leadership starts. And I think a lot of leaders, there is fear, which also prohibits them from making the difficult decisions. And I think that's where kind of as a foundational start of the dialogue here, I want to leave it at that for now, but I think that's the biggest part where I see at any level. I see hesitation, I see reconsideration, and pieces around that.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. Like you, I've had 40 years in the hospitality sector, and fascinating sector, but struggling at the moment. Can I ask you, are today's leaders fit for purpose to be tomorrow's leaders? I suspect not, unless they make change to, say, become more visible, more conscious. What's your thoughts?
So the short answer is I think they are. I'm a person who looks at the glass full. Yep. And then let's define on the various layers which are in the glass. I think when we talk about today's leaders, the first thing I want to say is we're very quick to designate somebody a leader. And let's define leader the same way we define there's statesmen in politics, and then there's a lot of politicians. There's a distinct difference. If I look at leaders and I talk about leaders in general, I've experienced people who are very young, but they are tremendous leaders if they're designated leaders or not. Meaning they don't necessarily hold the title of president or CEO, but in the group, the tribe, the movement they've been able to build around them, really significant impact. Mm. And I think then the other piece is what we need to really address is when we think about leaders, oftentimes we think about a generational maturity where we say, well, guys like you and I, because we've been around the block a couple of times, that's who we are and we're leaders. But what we're forgetting is we have 5 generations in the workforce right now, 5 generations, very young, very old. And the value system on each of those generations and also the fundamentals of the foundation of education, knowledge, competency has shifted. Mm-hmm. In the old days, if you had a high level of education, well, that was implicit of competency. The newsflash is, and I think that's where I think we're starting to see a lot of reskilling, upskilling, and pivoting in some organizations. Again, you asked opportunity here, where we also see the leadership of organizations like IBM. We see leadership of organizations like Google and others. And I come out of a space of education technology where 10, 15 years ago, we started talking about, self-driven education. So Coursera, Udemy, online learning in general, in the context of continued education, that's the opportunity. But just to say everybody's a leader because there's a title, I think that's giving too much credit, and I say this respectful. But I think that's also the opportunity for everybody to kind of flip the mirror, self-awareness, self-evaluation, self-assessment of how do I do in certain areas. I mean, there's a great book I was reminded of yesterday, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yeah.
And it's an old book.
Yes, it is.
But it's a goodie, as people like to say here. And what it is there's really an opportunity to look at that in every area of your life. Mm-hmm. And it's not about compartmentalizing, right? Values, they apply in your personal life, they apply in your business life. And a lot of us who journeyed through kind of the rise of corporate ladders, I think sometimes in times in our lives, we have separated those. We have said, well, on this side, I'm this way, and on that side, I'm going to be this way. And we justify it. And until you bring those both sides together,
gotcha.
I think you're not in the position of asking for that.
Yeah, I totally believe you on that Stephen Covey book, by the way. I think I can just see mine on the shelf over there. Change is all around, but it always has been the only constant. But now, more than ever, it has to happen. However, everyone will vote for change, but very few want to actually do it. And just picking up on what you said beforehand, I'm suggesting the words fear and risk to many are totally associated with change. Do you agree? Yep. And if so, what should leaders do about giving that change is vital now?
First off, yes, I agree. I think risk is a big part of it, and certainly fear, as I mentioned earlier. My recommendation to leaders is to really evaluate. There's a fact finding. I think that's the most important thing. I think fear is based on either reality or not. And I think also when we look at human nature and we look at how our body's chemistry reacts and what generates anxiety and fear, in the end, we don't really know if a particular event is going to happen or not. But our body's reaction, which generates fear, doesn't know the difference if it actually is real or not. So that's, I think, the first part, which is when you talk about self-awareness and you talk about emotional intelligence, you have to have that awareness from a self-aware standpoint and self-analytical standpoint that may be the case. So the first question is always, is it real or is it not? Mm-hmm. So, and with that comes the recommendation for leaders to really go on a fact-finding mission. And fact-finding mission really establish what is imaginative or presumptuous or what is really fact. And right there, the basis oftentimes for good leadership makes a distinct split here, right? Let's look at facts versus let's look at presumptions or possibilities. But then I think it is important to look at possibilities. And I always say to people in German, the word if and when is exactly the same word. In English, it's different. There's always the word if and there's the word when. And I think shifting the if to the when is very, very important because I think it addresses a couple of things. It addresses commitment, it addresses clarity, but it also addresses transparency. And I think in this day and age, truth, transparency, clarity, consistency, those 3-4 value system words, they are so important, but not just from a standpoint of the leader to themselves, but also to the people who have the uncertainty. There is the fear. The basic fear is survival. There is accountability and responsibility of the people who work for companies to their families, to their ecosystem they operate in. So I think that's a great first step for leaders to look at. Look at the facts, look at how you can affect it, look at what's the opportunity, and then really starting to be very transparent, open, and communicative with the people in your organization on any level.
Excellent. Yes. Now, before I move into our next question, Stephan, I just want to remind viewers and listeners of your URL, which is on the screen behind me. But for listeners, I'll read it out. It's humaninnovationgarage.com. humaninnovationgarage.com. I'll say that again, humaninnovationgarage.com. All one word there, .com. Okay, our BVTV Conscious Business Show with its Conscious Leader brand is our commitment, and I mean true commitment, to social consciousness. I noticed that you too offer skills training in this area. Why do you think it's important for today's leaders to become socially conscious?
Oh, I think it's most important. I think, first of all, I'm a believer then the energy you put out into the universe is the energy you get back. And that's just something I've adopted for myself. And I think that's just a healthy way to look at the world. And social conscience, I think with what we have going on in the world, if that is on the side of, you go to countries, and I spend a lot of time in countries like India, the impact you can make, if that's on food supply, if that is on health, if that is in any context of poverty, you go west of Kolkata into the poverty belt. If we're going into African continent in terms of health and support there, if we're looking at the environment, we look at consciousness in that respect. We're looking at today housing. We talked about the basic need of survival and what people seek there. I think there is so many different areas where companies all the way through the supply chain have a responsibility today to be very, very focused on that. Look at coffee companies. I look at that a lot. Some very good mates of mine, they for years and years and years are making their own coffee. They're a well-known coffee company on the East Coast. Fair trade is a big one. And the unfortunate part is, there's a lot of people who use these, let's call them sexy words, but what's the meaning behind it, right? If we look at fair trade in coffee, it goes a lot deeper than just putting a sticker on the door, but there needs to be, from a sourcing to the areas where the coffee comes from, the people who help ultimately source it on the local base there needs to be an understanding and transparency also to the organization who then ultimately brings the coffee here. And oftentimes step 1, step 2 is done, but step 3, step 4 is missing. So I think there needs to be a brutal honesty about it. And what I mean with that is full transparency and impact control. And there's a lot of companies who are doing it really well. And I will say the two gentlemen I was referring to, they do it fantastically well. But I also know that it has become, I think what's important to say with social impact is this. The demand in the market of consumers, when they go shopping and they start looking at labeling, and the organizations who are from a neutral aspect controlling that now in terms of being an evaluator, are they or are they not the company who is claiming they are? I think that's become so much better over the last decade.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I think we got a far way to go. And for the reasons of consumers, but also just your personal value system, the consciousness. There's this Japanese proverb which says, you have 3 phases in life. The first phase is for your friends and family. The second phase is for business. And the third phase is the phase you have to wake up every morning. And that phase knows what you did or didn't do. And I think that goes back to integrity. And I think with social consciousness, integrity, that word cannot be missed in that respect and needs to be talked about. And I think that's a big part of it.
Brilliantly said. Brilliantly said. I shall look in the mirror tomorrow morning, see what the face is looking like. Look, you're a busy on-air and in-vision person. Tell us about what and where we can hear you on a regular basis and why you think it's worth all that hard work and commitment to produce such content. And trust me, it is hard work and dedication, isn't it?
I think content is all about the community, right? And I think we make content very, very complicated. Content is the easiest and the greatest advice I've ever heard was from Gary Vaynerchuk, who's a gentleman who's based with VaynerMedia here in the United States, is a every entrepreneur's hero, has various brands and has been at it for a long, long time. And what he says is just document. Right? We make content too complicated. Just document what you do and let people enjoy that. And I think this is when we think about a movement, somebody has an idea and decides, well, this is what I'm going to do. The most important person in a movement is the first follower. Until you have the first follower, you don't have a movement. And with the movement, then if even somebody is the idea person who started it, Suddenly with the movement that comes responsibility. Just as you serve your community and your audience, it is serving, it is providing, it is supporting. And I think that's where content really comes in. It's not about, oh, look at me. It's about, how can I provide value? How can I provide resources? How can I provide access? I think these 2, 3, 4 words, and I'm sure there's plenty of more we could add to that. That's an important part about content. From our side, as you know, and I'm not telling anybody any news, our strategy had to shift significantly back in March. For the simple reason, a big part of what I do and what we as an organization do, we do workshops, we do keynoting, we talk with groups, we do all-day venues, we do retreats. All that had to fall away. So how do we replace this? So we do a lot of digital production now, where we go into studios and we bring people in on remote monitors and have still the virtualization of community. I think community has become more than ever before so important. And I think it's about, creating high value content. I think that's the big part about content. It's got to be relevant. It has to be targeted oftentimes. But at the same time, I'm also a believer, if you are consistent, it's like a restaurant. You open up a restaurant, the first year is tough. If you are, somebody who creates Caribbean food, or you're somebody who makes fantastic North or Southern Indian food, the consistency of that, the first year is difficult. Year 2, people will find you and you will have a natural attraction. I think with content, it's a little bit the same thing. If you're known for niching on particular content, or there's content which is a particular resource for something, just as you all at your station have various channels, it becomes very, very similar. And I think that's the big part. So I think the takeaway is it's got to be high value. You got to be of service to your community. You got to provide consistency. I think that's the biggest parts.
And I'm going to endorse your high value, because that's what you're delivering for me in this interview. You say you have a holistic approach to help people set themselves apart. Can you explain this and why and how it works?
Sure. So for me, a holistic approach means, listen to your body, listen to what you're really doing. So I challenge, as a simple example, one of the first weeks of my work will always focus on your practice, your rituals, your habituation you've created, or identifying in the first place, do you have it or do you have it not? Simplistic, holistic is understanding what does your body's chemistry really reflect back to you in its sensations and its behavior, essentially. Take working out in the morning. Dopamine, serotonin, as you walk into a room with serotonin, feeling this calm. When you go home at nighttime, you feel relaxed, you feel calm, but it's a body's reaction. If you're not in tune to listening to that, well, it may be troublesome for you at some point, because you don't know which environment actually works for you. People work the same way. So there's from an emotional intelligence quadrant, if we think about self-awareness, self-assessment, but then also self-management. Self-management becomes the next step, right? Where that holistic journey starts, where if I walk into a room and I feel uncomfortable, I need to ask myself the question, why is that? Mm-hmm. If I walk into a room and I feel excitement, well, is that a positive excitement, or is it excitement which comes from a side of I'm defending myself? So what of the chemistry workshops is starting to work for me? So that's where kind of a lot of the holistic part starts. I'm a huge believer in a morning protocol. Workout, meditate. Meditation is a daily ritual for me. Even though there's sometimes mornings where people say, I don't have enough time. It makes such a difference. And meditation, if you don't have 10 minutes to meditate 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the sufficient smile about it. But I think it is time management. I think in this day and age, I think that's going back to your question, what's the opportunity, is so important, because it's about prioritization, mm-hmm. right? And I think I've worked with Olympic athletes. And when you think about high performance athletes, how they train, the focus, there is cycles of high focus, and then there are cycles of recovery. And I think when you talk about holistic, that's another piece, right? Our body can't go full speed all the time. And it's not, in a creative sense, it's not helpful. But it's hard for people to accept that grinding is not going to get them success. Because again, we talked about generations earlier. The traditionalist generations is, oh, grind, 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 grind. Well, no, that's not going to get you results. Results and recovery is important because it allows you reflection. It allows you revisiting of your experience. It allows you discovery of shortcomings, but it also allows you ideation and innovation around what worked, what didn't work, how should I change it? Again, it goes back to fact. And then when I do when, which becomes a commitment to myself.
Yes, that is excellent advice. I wish I'd learned earlier in my life, to take that time as you were talking about. But I was in travel and hospitality, go, 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 go all the time there. I've learned it later in life, though. Let's step aside for a moment. Tell me about the real Stephan, the one I can't read about on your website or your bio. What drives you? What makes you bounce out of bed each morning? What do you believe your purpose is? And how do you measure yourself on achievement?
So my purpose, I see, what bounces me out of bed is really, it's interesting. I was, later this week, I'm on a show, thank God it's Monday. And I have to tell you, I'm disappointed when it's Friday evening, Saturday morning. Not that I don't enjoy my weekends, but I don't look at the week Monday through Friday. It's just not the way I look at my work. It's not the way I look at the week. It's not the way I do my business. What really makes me bounce out of bed is that I work with some amazing people. I work with some amazing colleagues. I have support of some amazing people in my life. I think that's a big part of it. And I think purpose for me is I have a 28-year-old daughter who I adore to shits. I mean, that's a big part of that. I think it's for me to look forward to see friends. I've become over the last 6 months, probably more than ever before, very, selective is not the right word, but I'm very intentional how I spend my time and who I spend my time with, going back to where do I feel good? Where do I know I can be myself? And I think then the third part, for me, we haven't talked about this, so you can't read on the website about it. I say it in my podcast. I am a heart attack survivor. And I had a heart attack. I didn't keel over. I was in February of this year, February 24th. I was walking downtown Boston. And I felt a little funny. And that got me the gift of a quadruple bypass 48 hours later. And that is kind of a full stop, a punctuation in your life, where you look at it and you say, interesting. What just happened here? But also, you evaluate the people around you, you evaluate the choices you've made in life, you wonder what's gotten you there. And I actually started writing a book, which is called Breaking My Own Heart. Because I think integrity, we talked a little bit about earlier. For a long time in my life, and we can talk about it, the reasons in more depth, but for a long time in my life, I was talking about integrity, but I didn't have any. I was living a compartmentalized life where I think for myself, I was able to say, oh, no, that's who I'm in business. But in personal, I was allowing myself choices in a direction which was not in line with integrity. And I think that's why when my purpose is in life to impact people, I want people to understand what that means to have integrity. And I want people to understand from the most sincere and compassionate and empathetic way that if you make choices the way I've made them and you live a double life and you live things differently on the external versus on the internal, it goes back to the Japanese proverb, the anxiety, the fear of discovery or fear of people not realizing you're not who you say you are, the imposter syndrome, all these things which regardless at what level and who you are, people deal with that all the time. There's a research study from Stanford from years ago where they interviewed about 50 leaders of Fortune 500 companies. And their number one fear was being discovered as a fraud. So this is not predominant to anybody who is a young entrepreneur or an old entrepreneur or successful or not. It has nothing to do with that. It's just inherent to us. But that's my purpose. That's where I really start to talk to people. I host You were mentioning it earlier, in a coffee chat every Thursday morning. And it's all about vulnerability connecting. It's not me talking. I set a theme. We talk about vulnerability. We talk about grace in business. We talk about what defines success. We talk about what defines home. Right? To a lot of people, and to me, home for a long time defined a big house and a 3-car garage and a car for a different day. But that's not home.
No.
Right? These are the things as we get older, we may learn. But my wish is that people who are 20, 25, they start learning that very early on. And I think that's the beauty of community these days. I mean, you talked about content earlier. That's, I think, the responsibility, the stewardship we have as the older generation to extend that impact, but also acknowledging that the young generation, when you and I learned, my father would say to me, if I didn't know something, go study, go learn it, go something. The young generation has this immense access to community in a global dimension. And they've learned to access that. So let's continue to invite them into our community and be part of their community, rather than this. Sometimes I see this, we talked about fear, we talked about anxiety, rather that fear and anxiety of separating, and that feeling and of, oh my God, I feel threatened by somebody younger. No, embrace it. See it as, opportunity. See it as an eye opener. See it as a gift. Yeah. And I think that's a big part of that. I'm sorry. I can go on and on and on about this.
I love it. And we're in sympathy, with total sympathy with you there, because last night, just as I was going to bed, my daughter, one of my 2 daughters, my daughter was in the hospital with her 1-year-old son. It had to have a COVID test. He was throwing up and things like that. And, you suddenly realize material and all that sort of thing is nothing. That was the thing. Stephan, you've given us so much value in this interview. Absolutely brilliant value. I want to give something back to you. It's your sell to the world time. I'm giving you free, and it was cost a fortune, this, I'm giving you free a 20-second or so advert as to why my viewers should go visit your website, and the URL is on the screen behind me. Just remind them, Human Innovation Garage, humaninnovationgarage.com, why they should go to the URL straight after viewing this interview.
If there's anything you've heard that resonates with you. So first off, thank you for that, Malcolm. I really appreciate it. If there's anything that resonated with you, anything where you feel that you have identified a pattern from past or present that may have served you in the past, but does no longer serve you in the present, or you are certain that it won't serve you in the future, go to our website and have a look. There's plenty of resources also, which are free for download. We also have a site called radicalselfaware.com, where you can download some free things as well, and have a chat. I'm happy to always get to know people. I'm a human being, and human beings define me. So you asked about purpose. This has been a pleasure, and certainly if there's any kind of discovery somebody had about themselves and realization, I'm happy to have a chat as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Stephan. I knew this was going to be an inspiring meeting for everyone. So viewers, don't keep it to yourself. Tell friends and colleagues to watch it, and then get even more from the video by having your own discussion of what myself and Stephan have been talking about. Thanks, Stephan, for a great interview.
Malcolm, thank you so very much for having me once again. It's been a pleasure.